A little while back, I reviewed the adult animation known as Euphoria, which is an adaptation of the identically titled visual novel by ClockUp. To sum up that video in a sentence, the visual novel is a phenomenal piece of writing, but the adaptation is pretty terrible. But the interesting thing about that video is that it had much more reach than usual, and there were a lot of discourse in the comments. But while there were plenty of great comments, a decent number couldn't look past the extreme subject matter enough to even begin grasping at the underlying story. And these people would blindly unleash their own flawed interpretation about the story's themes and messages. And I think that's a shame, because how can you treat a story fairly if you can't even look at it for what it is? I absolutely welcome disagreement and criticism, but the extreme nature of Euphoria prevents some people from even coming to the table in good faith. So I want to take a quick look at one of Euphoria's core themes, a theme that admittedly wasn't nearly as fleshed out in the adaptation as it was in the original visual novel. That theme is an exploration of the experience of deriving some sort of pleasure from human suffering and the moral implications that surround that. This is explored in multiple ways throughout the course of the story. Do be aware that this video will contain heavy spoilers for the Euphoria visual novel. Suffering and pleasure. While it's not the only idea Euphoria touches on, I'd argue that it's the most prevalent. And the most obvious example of this is our protagonist Keisuke. Very early on, it's revealed that he has a dark secret. He has a strong fetish for domination and sexual sadism. He has fantasies about enacting total control over women. But the thing is, he's not actually a bad guy, and in the real world, he's more than capable of controlling himself. His moral compass ensures that he's able to suppress those desires, and he even feels quite a bit of shame for even having them. But his main internal conflict throughout the course of Euphoria centers around two external factors that are actively stoking those flames. The first is that he's been kidnapped and was put into a facility where he's forced to play a number of games, which are essentially a sexual version of the group gauntlet traps from Saw 5. In order to beat the games, which is the only way to both prevent a violent execution at the hands of their mysterious assailants and the only obvious means of escape, he must perform depraved acts of a brutally sexual nature on his classmates and teacher. These acts are abhorrent to his conscience, but feed into the desires he's suppressed for so long. The second factor is his classmate Nemu, who is with him in the facility. While she's as much an unwilling participant as he is, she appears to be enjoying the situation and displays both sadistic and masochistic tendencies. No matter which story route Keisuke is on, remember that this is a story with multiple endings that each require their own playthrough. She torments him and tries to push him into embracing his demons while also driving a wedge between him and his childhood friend Kanae. Throughout the facility portion of the story, Keisuke has no choice but to engage with the depravity of the games. Not doing so would subject the entire group to a painful death, which the masters of the game have already proven. So saying no is not an option. And for this first arc of the story, the driving conflict is that Keisuke finds himself enjoying the things he has to do, and in the moment, he sometimes loses himself a bit. However, once his more rational side takes over, he begins to feel terrible, both for the fact that he hurt someone and because he feels extremely guilty for having enjoyed it. All the while, Nemu is fucking with him and slowly picking away at his sanity, driving him closer and closer to finally snapping when he's already in a high-stress environment. And this is only amplified by the next set of trials where Keisuke has to risk his own life to save the lives of the others. And right when he's already almost lost it, we get the school arc. And I'll be the first to tell you that the adaptation did this part incredibly poorly. Some of the specifics of this part of the story do vary depending on which timeline route we're talking about, but in all of them the game has spread and is basically total anarchy with all the depravity of the facility and then some. And Nemu is at the top of it all. And she continues to torment Keisuke, and there are more times where he's incentivized to do horrible things. Sometimes it's reasonable, such as when it's a choice between do this to Kanae or Nemu will do worse. Sometimes not so much. This whole section of the story is designed to explore Keisuke at his breaking point. How far can he be pushed, and what will he do beyond that point? And the answer changes based on your choices. And the question of how wrong, right, or understandable his choices are and whether or not he's wrong for enjoying himself is largely up to the reader. But Keisuke is not the only character who explores suffering and pleasure. Rinne approaches things from a completely different angle. She seeks out suffering but does not actually derive pleasure from it. The adaptation kind of explores this, but only kind of. She's the daughter of a cult leader who had assaulted Keisuke as a child. And yes, that means the Rinne route of the VN is very Alabama. The cult's belief was that the leader would give birth to the savior who would bring them to paradise. However, the savior can only be a man, meaning that Rinne is a failure in their eyes. The cult also believes that suffering is how one cleanses their soul, so Rinne embraces the game as a means of atoning for her supposed sin. So during her scenes, she is genuinely miserable, but she derives a degree of satisfaction from them. But it's also interesting because she's very clearly damaged as a result of the cult indoctrination, especially seeing as they taught her that she was a failure. So when she and Keisuke explore their demons together, they do form a bond that's almost healthy. Rinne sees the depths of Keisuke's darkness that he's hidden for so long and accepts them. Keisuke grows to care for Rinne and gives her the supportive figure that she's never really had. This route in particular fascinates me because it's probably the best example of another interesting thing that Euphoria does. A lot of the aesthetics of Euphoria can be boiled down to a caricature of BDSM, and in fact, most of the H scenes are things that fetishists engage with in the real world. But while the other routes have other things going on, Rinne's route caricatures some of the elements of a healthy BDSM dynamic. Full disclosure, I'm not into the lifestyle at all, so this is all secondhand, but I do have a layman's understanding from speaking to people who are. So think about it. Most of the H scenes are only horrible because one or more of the participants are forced into it. They'd be perfectly fine if there was consent all around. Rinne's route ultimately showcases a variant of that dynamic, at least in the first arc. Keisuke gets to act out his urges on a willing partner who will accept him, whereas Rinne gets the catharsis of pain delivered by someone who she knows will never truly harm her. That's how a dynamic like this can play out. He feels loved and she feels protected. But of course, that kinda goes to shit in the second half of the route where she takes control of the cult. So, as I said earlier, the cult views suffering as a path towards cleansing one's soul. So they engage in suffering not for pleasure but for fulfillment. They are shown to self-flagellate, and when they capture Nemu in Rinne's route, they torture and abuse her for days on end. While I can't speak for the individual cult members, Rinne at least takes no pleasure in this. Rather views it as a means of saving Nemu from her sins, which, to be fair, she does do some truly horrific things in the school arc. So to the cult, and Rinne specifically, this act of cruelty is actually viewed as a kindness, a few days of suffering in exchange for a clean slate. There's other interesting things going on with the cult, but it's not entirely relevant for this video. The next example of the pleasure and suffering theme would be Nemu. I mean, that should be pretty obvious. She's a secondary antagonist in the first arc of the story before becoming the primary antagonist. She displays clear sadistic tendencies, but also some masochistic ones, as she views giving and receiving pain to be two sides of the same coin. That's why she enjoys tormenting Keisuke, and also why she loves doing the trials with him. In fact, it's so blatant that it almost seems kinda one-note. Except that changes when the true route hits. Big boy spoiler time, by the way. So when you first play Euphoria, Kanae's route is locked. To access it, you must do the other routes first. And at the end of Kanae's route, there's a callback to Nemu's route, where Keisuke is strangling Nemu in a blind rage but is able to snap out of it before it's too late, which Nemu was none too happy about. Well, in Kanae's route, Keisuke goes through with it, which then leads to the reveal that it was all a Matrix-style virtual reality simulation. None of that was really real, and Nemu was actually putting on an act. See, the sadistic monster she was playing was actually very similar to the lead researcher, Kanae. I'll explain why in a bit, but Kanae had agreed to a bet with Nemu. She and Keisuke would be put into the simulation, Keisuke's memories would be tweaked while inside to remember Kanae as his childhood friend, and Nemu as a classmate he'd never really spoken to. In order to win the bet, Nemu must get Keisuke to kill her in the simulation, and as a reward, she will wake him up and let them be together. Now, I'll quickly modify what I said earlier. The behavior of just ha 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 sadist is pretty one-note and is fine for an antagonist, but is nothing special really. But now, that applies to Kanae instead of Nemu. But more importantly, this recontextualizes everything we thought we knew about Nemu. Her real personality that we discover in the true route is very loving, affectionate, lonely, and pretty docile, all things considered. But she had to do and endure some pretty awful things in the simulation to win her bet. She tormented the man she loved and directly orchestrated some pretty brutal H scenes in the school arc. Granted, it's highly likely that the people involved were actually literal NPCs, so no real harm was done, but it still looked, sounded, felt, and smelled the same to her as if it were real. So I'd bet it affected her. But this does showcase another interesting angle of this whole suffering thing. She literally pushed someone she loved into a homicidal rage. Of course, it wasn't real, but he didn't know that. But she did it for a greater good, and found solace in the reward of being with Keisuke in some capacity. Is that acceptable? Some might say no. Others might say the ends justified those particular means. Nemu is by all observable metrics a kind girl who would normally never hurt a fly, but with the right push, she wholeheartedly participated in Kanae's sick game. And that's all because of the final piece of this video, the organization. I find these guys fascinating because they are easily the most cruel entity in Euphoria. Like, I don't think it's even close. But they're also completely devoid of malice. Theirs is a cold, dispassionate cruelty. See, they are a company who have developed a simulation that gives its users a total paradise. An eternity of pleasure, peace, and happiness. And of course, they are in the process of selling space in paradise at premium rates. Nothing wrong with that on the surface. But the one issue is that in order for the simulation to function properly, because of some science fiction bullshit, it must have a person serve as the focal nexus. That person must possess several traits, and Nemu just so happens to fit the criteria. Again, nothing inherently problematic here, as there is certainly worse ways to earn a living than hang around in paradise. But the real problem is that this person must have given up on all semblance of hope. They must be emotionally destroyed or the simulation will fight them for control. So the organization needs to break Nemu. While they don't directly take pleasure in her pain, they will do anything in their power to hurt her enough for her to serve her purpose. They sign off on all of Kanae's twisted ideas because they can then work towards turning Nemu into what they need. In the Brood ending, which interestingly enough isn't actually required to unlock the true route, it's almost comical how much of an anime villain Keisuke becomes. He takes over the school and turns the main girls into fixtures for his new lounge room. And yes, he literally treats them like pieces of furniture except for Rika, who he treats like a pet. So he's basically a Drukari in training. Nemu in particular has a rough time having been turned into a living sex toy, a process which has both crippled and disfigured her permanently, at least in the simulation. Now, the true route changes this ending in two distinct ways. Firstly, it reveals that most likely everyone except Keisuke and Nemu are NPCs, so he's not actually doing as much harm as it seems. But secondly, the way the school arc is done is that it's basically a King of the Hill style free-for-all. If you overpower the current leader and follow the organization's rules as they're given, you're the boss and can do pretty much whatever you want. Well, when Keisuke overthrows Nemu in the Brood ending, the organization instructs him to make sure that Nemu gives up on all hope, essentially twisting her attempts to win the bet and manipulating Keisuke into fulfilling their goals. This turns the ending from almost a joke ending into a Shakespearean-style tragedy where Nemu must watch Keisuke indulge in the evil that she had hoped to save him from, while also suffering extreme physical and emotional torture for presumably the rest of her life, but at the very least several years. And it's all her fault. And for me, the organization is terrifying in their indifference. At least Kanae gives the evil things she does some gravitas, an acknowledgement that they are fucked up. But the organization doesn't even bat an eye when it orchestrates war crimes that would make the fucking CIA blush. These kinds of horror villains tap into a very specific type of fear, and to me it feels almost reminiscent of Lovecraft. And if you've seen either of my Sayano Uta videos, you'll know that I like Lovecraft. But if you've read his stories, or at least the cosmic horror ones, you'll know that most of his eldritch creatures, with Nyarlathotep being a major exception, don't actually have any real malice. It's not that they take pleasure in causing madness and death, it's that humans are so far beneath their notice that to them destroying a life is no different than to us stepping on an ant would be. The organization acts in much the same way. They don't exactly want to make people feel sadness and hurt, it's simply the most effective means to their desired ends. It's actual psychopath shit. When they see someone hurting, they don't feel bad like a normal person would, and they don't feel glee like a sadistic monster would. They feel nothing at all. They are the culmination of this whole theme of suffering that Euphoria loves to explore. They cause unimaginable pain because it lines their pockets, and that's enough for them. So this video was actually inspired by the comments on the one about the hentai adaptation. Because again, there were some great comments, but also a lot of people outraged at the idea of a horror story making them uncomfortable, as if that wasn't the entire fucking point. But due to having just made a video on it, and due to reading the comments, Euphoria's been on my mind and I wanted to talk about it some more. Though it's definitely been too long for me to make one of my normal in-depth videos without giving it a full reread. So I decided to focus more on a single aspect of the story. Let me know if you like this kind of thing, and I'll consider doing it more often. Not just for Euphoria, but for other pieces of media as well. Well, thanks for watching. Big thank you to my channel members, especially my $10 member, Bulk Squad Thrust. They all got this video early, and if you'd like to join them, you can do so via the join button below for as little as $1 a month. As always, click all the buttons down there to help me in the algorithm, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Play the electro swing.
Hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more. Hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back.